Hi, welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
And we are missing Kayla, but it's because she's doing a self-defense class.
Yes.
Which we all support and love.
Yes.
And probably should do too.
Yeah. We just need her to teach us
Yes.
when she's done.
We'll have
Okay.
some lessons later.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear later what she's learning.
Yes.
I have a really crazy, twisty, turny case for you today.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds intriguing.
Yes.
It is from Minnesota and
okay.
the 1960s.
Okay.
So we're going back. Should we jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. In 1963, one of Minnesota's most shocking crimes shattered the calm of an affluent St. Paul neighborhood. It had all the ingredients of a dark crime thriller: a picture-perfect family, money, secrets, a brutal attack, and an ending so twisted it felt stranger than fiction. This is the murder of 34-year-old Carol Thompson, a case so infamous that a state historian called it the most important murder case in state history. And its bungling criminal plot is said to have partly inspired the Coen brothers' film Fargo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Carol Ann Swidoba was born on October 11th, 1928 in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was the only child of a respected local business owner. Being an only child, she grew up doted on by her parents, Otto and Antonia, in a comfortable household that emphasized community, faith, and education. Friends and family later described Carol as warm, kind, socially active, the sort of person who was always ready with a smile and always involved in her community. She was smart, personable, with a lively spirit that made her popular among her peers. By the mid-1940s, as World War II ended and the country entered a hopeful new era, Carol was entering adulthood as a bright young woman in St. Paul's close-knit social circles. In 1946, Carol enrolled at Macalester College in St. Paul. It was a time when many young men were returning from the war and going to school on the GI Bill. One of those men was Tilmer T. Eugene Thompson, a Navy veteran from southern Minnesota who had served in the Pacific. Eugene, who for some reason went by the nickname Cotton, which is what we'll call him through this episode, was studying economics at Macalester after his military service. He was clean-cut, ambitious, a real charmer. As Arthur William Swanson later put it, he was a world-class schmoozer, a friendly, smiling, charming fellow, always eager to chat and shake hands. Carol and Cotton's paths crossed on campus, and the chemistry was immediate. Their meetings in those days aren't documented in detail, but one can easily imagine the scene. Carol, the sociable sophomore, perhaps running into Cotton, the confident veteran, at a campus event or maybe a local soda shop. Maybe he offered to carry her books, or they bonded over a class or a church gathering. What we do know is that they quickly became college sweethearts. Carol's vivacious personality paired well with Cotton's outgoing charm. By Carol's sophomore year, the couple decided they didn't want to wait any longer, and they got married on March 27th, 1948, in a local ceremony in St. Paul. A black and white photo from that day shows Carol beaming in a smart suit and a pillbox hat on her proud walk down the aisle, arm in arm with her new husband, the post-war groom looking dapper in a double-breasted suit. The newlyweds were young. Carol was 19, Cotton was 21, and they were hopeful. They set about building a life together in St. Paul, little knowing that less than 15 years later, their storybook marriage would hide some dark secrets and deadly intentions.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Or ominous.
Or ominous.
A little.
Yeah.
In the years following their wedding, Carol and Cotton appeared to embody the American dream. Cotton continued his studies, eventually earning a law degree in 1955, while Carol supported him and took on the role of homemaker. As Cotton launched his career as an attorney, first joining a prominent St. Paul law firm, Carol began having children and building their family. The Thompsons ultimately had 4 children, born in rapid succession. They had a son, Jeff, and 3 daughters, Patricia, Amy, and Margaret. By 1963, the children ranged in age from 6 to 13, keeping Carol's hands full and her heart warm. Carol was, by all accounts, a devoted mother and wife. She dove deep into the classic mom lifestyle of the late 50s and the early 60s. Picture this: Carol driving a station wagon full of kids to school activities, baking for the PTA. She led her eldest daughter's brownie troop. Yep, Carol was the Girl Scouts brownie leader. And volunteering at church on Sundays. She was deeply active in her church community and even took an interest in local civic matters. A neighbor remembered she, quote, took an active interest in government, perhaps through the League of Women Voters or similar groups. Friends considered her a warm friend, a gracious host, and a sought-after guest at social gatherings. Carol had a talent for making others feel welcome. Her home was often open for neighborhood coffee, get-togethers, and dinner parties. If this was a 1960s TV show, Carol would be the beloved, wholesome mom next door. Think Donna Reed, but real. Cotton, for his part, was an up-and-coming attorney in St. Paul. He initially worked at a firm handling civil and criminal cases. As his reputation grew, so did the Thompsons' family prosperity. By the early 1960s, Cotton had branched out to start his own practice. He was reportedly earning $40,000 a year, which, Laura, sorry, you are the one that has to guess. How much do you think that is today?
I don't know.
Not even a guess.
80,000.
No, 40,000 in 1960.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I was guessing 80,000.
Okay, well, it's over 400,000.
Close, though. That was
Oh, sorry. I was asking 80,000
That's crazy.
for in
It's that much
1960.
more.
Yeah, right.
How many years is that? 40,
Well, 60.
60 years?
Two.
Yeah.
62 years.
Like,
yep. Good.
what year are we in now?
1963. Yes. The family.
Not good at those.
I know.
That's Krista next time.
I can see it.
I know.
I can't guess.
Fine.
You have to take it on
She
today.
can see my notes.
Krista, we're switching spots.
I won't do any better.
Oh, I should have asked her before I got to that part of my notes.
Yes, next time.
Yes. Okay. With that kind of income, the family moved into a large 2.5-story brick home in St. Paul's Highland Park, which was an upscale neighborhood of tidy lawns, tree-lined streets. Their house was the kind of place you describe as idyllic, a comfortable, upper-middle-class home in a safe neighborhood. Neighbors in Highland Park were used to feeling safe. People left doors unlocked. Kids roamed freely on bicycles. For her part, Carol kept a tidy, welcoming household there, decorating with modern touches like new wall-to-wall carpeting, doors, windows. From the outside, the Thompsons seemed to have it all: success, money, beautiful children, and social respectability. They even had a family dog, at least until early 1963. Hold that thought. Carol and Cotton were known to take vacations together, and they loved taking their kids, creating memories. They would go on road trips. They would go to a lake cabin that Carol's father owned up in Forest Lake. In many ways, they appeared to be a model couple. Friends saw them as affectionate and supportive of each other. They were active together in social circles. As one account later noted, their married life was harmonious, and they seemed to get along so well, taking many trips with each other. It was the sort of marriage that made people maybe a little jealous. How did Carol and Cotton manage 4 kids and still look poised and happy? On March 6th, 1963, a Wednesday, it began like any other day in the Thompson household. It was late winter in Minnesota with the chill in the air and snow still on the ground. Carol, 34, woke up early to get her children ready for the day. By about 8:30 that morning, the household had fallen quiet. The kids had either left for school or were on their way, and Cotton had already departed for work. Being a busy attorney, he had appointments to keep after all. Carol was home alone in her comfortable home on West Milwaukee Street in Highland Park. She might have been finishing tidying up breakfast dishes or thinking about the errand she had that day. She went upstairs to take a minute to get ready. It was shaping up to be an ordinary, peaceful morning for her. That peace was shattered in an instant. Sometime after 8:30 a.m., Carol was surprised by an intruder right inside her home. A man, someone Carol did not know, appeared upstairs near the bedroom, catching her completely off guard. We can only imagine Carol's shock and the adrenaline that must have flooded through her. There had been no warning. I mean, the family dog wasn't around to bark. They had given him away just a few weeks before. And the upstairs telephone that Carol might have grabbed to call for help had been mysteriously removed. Carol was face to face with this stranger and had almost no way to call for help inside her own home. What unfolded next was a horrific struggle, and it's not for the faint of heart. The attacker had come prepared to do unspeakable harm. He lunged at Carol, and before she could flee, he struck her with a rubber hose filled with metal.
Oh.
A crude bludgeon he'd brought for this purpose.
That's awful. Yeah.
So awful. The first blow stunned Carol, knocking her to the floor and leaving her dazed and hurt. With Carol down, the assailant dragged her into the bathroom. His plan, if you can call it that, was already underway. He attempted to drown Carol in the bathtub. She was battered and barely conscious, but not defeated. As the intruder forced her head underwater, Carol fought like hell. In that desperate moment, it's said that she even cried out, "God help me," a plea heard by no one but her attacker. Somehow, through sheer will and perhaps a surge of adrenaline, Carol regained consciousness and managed to wrench free from the would-be killer's grip. Imagine the scene: soaking wet, injured Carol, fueled by terror and motherly determination to survive, scrambling out of the bathtub and bolting for her life. The intruder's carefully laid plan was now falling apart, and he panicked. As Carol, in her bathrobe, staggered down the stairs, the assailant grabbing his next weapon, a handgun he had brought along. He aimed and pulled the trigger at the fleeing woman. Click. Nothing. The gun jammed or misfired. It turns out this cheap pistol hadn't been well maintained. Fate was not on the killer's side, thankfully. Frustrated and desperate to finish what he started, the assailant then rushed after Carol, who made it downstairs and almost to the front door. At this point, he pistol whipped her, slamming the gun's butt into her head repeatedly when the gun itself wouldn't fire. Carol was grievously hurt. Her skull was fractured by these blows. But even this wasn't enough to subdue her completely. Her survival instinct was in overdrive. Finally, in a last brutal measure, the intruder pulled out a knife and stabbed Carol in the neck, inflicting a deep wound. He pulled it out and stabbed her again, this time with the knife handle breaking off, leaving the blade in Carol's neck. Carol collapsed, bleeding heavily. Her attacker stood over her, no doubt catching his breath from the violence of the struggle. Carol appeared lifeless. The pristine home was now a blood-spattered crime scene. Evidence of an assault horrifying in its ferocity. The intruder, who had tried every method imaginable to kill Carol, believed he had finally succeeded. It was a frenzy of violence, as if the attacker was frantically cycling through murder methods when each previous attempt failed. It's no wonder observers later compared this crime's ineptitude to Fargo, only this was tragically real. Breathing heavily and soaked from the bathroom struggle, the assailant looked down at Carol. She was motionless and covered in blood. Surely she was dead now. The nightmare was over, for him at least. The attacker took a moment to wash up in the bathroom upstairs, trying to clean Carol's blood off his hands and face. He likely wanted to leave as little evidence as possible. He absolutely hadn't counted on Carol fighting so hard. As the intruder was cleaning himself up, something astonishing happened behind his back. Carol got up again. Despite the unimaginable injuries she had sustained, head trauma, water in her lungs, a bulletless gun's bruising, and a knife wound to her neck, Carol was not finished fighting for her life. In an almost superhuman feat, this 34-year-old homemaker pulled herself off the floor, bleeding, likely dizzy, in agony. Carol's will to live outpowered everything. She knew if she stayed in the house, she would die. So, Carol stumbled out the door in search of help. It was below freezing outside that March morning, and Carol was barefoot, wearing only a robe, dripping wet and covered in blood. She must have been a ghastly sight as she made her way across the snow to her neighbor's house, the Nelsons. At around 9 a.m., Carol knocked on this neighbor's door. Ruth Nelson had been sitting at her kitchen table reading the paper and not expecting visitors. She peeked out the door and didn't see anyone, but for some reason, opened the door anyways. When Ruth opened the door, she saw a woman so bloodied and beaten that at first she didn't even recognize her as Carol Thompson, even though they were good friends. Carol was in shock, barely able to speak. She collapsed into Ruth's arms. "Help, I've been attacked," she whispered. It's heartbreaking to imagine.
That is so sad.
So awful.
And I can't even imagine like opening your door and seeing your neighbor and your friend like that.
No.
Mhm.
That
And
would be
they
horrifying.
weren't even next door neighbors. She had to make her way down the street.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Ruth called her husband, Harry, and her son, Sydney, who was still home, and they moved Carol into the front room. Harry ran and called for an ambulance and the police while Ruth and her son frantically tried to comfort Carol as they waited. The two asked Carol who did this to her, and even though she was incredibly weak, she answered, "A man did it." Ruth asked her if she knew his name, and she thought Carol responded, "Johnson." Even now, Carol was clinging to life with remarkable tenacity. One of the men, who would later confess to involvement in this crime, said of Carol's last stand, "I never saw anyone who wanted to live so hard in all my life." Her fighting spirit was undeniable. Across the street, a neighbor saw what was happening. She called to her husband, who was a doctor of paramedics, to run over and offer assistance. Dr. Fitzpearson arrived and was shocked at what he found. He instructed the son to go grab wet towels, and he tried to clean up Carol and see what injuries she had. It was clear she had been beaten, and they assumed that was where the blood was coming from. As he did this, he found the cut mark in her neck and then found the part of the blade knife that was still there.
That probably saved her life a little bit.
Maybe
At least to this point.
to get
her
her
to
like
this point.
bleed out more through that cut. Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of hold.
Seal it in.
Yeah.
Mhm. The ambulance arrived soon after and rushed Carol to Anchor Hospital in St. Paul. The doctors struggled to save her. She had suffered catastrophic injuries. She had severe head trauma, deep lacerations, internal bleeding, truly massive injuries for one person to endure. When she arrived at the hospital, she was unconscious and without a measurable blood pressure. News of the assault spread rapidly through St. Paul. In 1963, such brutal violence in a safe neighborhood was virtually unheard of. Neighbors were horrified. A homicidal maniac was apparently on the loose in Highland Park, of all places. Police swarmed the Thompson residence, roping off the once cozy home as a crime scene. The front page headline of the Minneapolis Star that evening blared, "St. Paul mother of four stabbed to death in home." Residents locked their doors tight that night, many for the first time in their lives, and kept their children indoors out of fear. The idea that a random intruder could pick a house in this peaceful community and commit this was the stuff of nightmares.
I keep thinking to our episode about hitmen.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Hmm.
You said the phone mysteriously wasn't there.
Dog was given away. in
Dog was
advance.
given away just
Yeah.
barely. Like, this is ringing hitman to me.
Carol's husband, Cotton, was called by the Nelson's son, Sydney, shortly after Harry called the police. Sydney had only told him there was an accident involving Carol, and he didn't know more than that. By the time he got the call, Carol was already on her way to the hospital. Instead of going straight to the hospital, maybe miscommunication, he headed home and even stopped briefly at the Nelson home. When he went to his own home, detectives were already there evaluating the scene. For a few hours, hope flickered that Carol might pull through. Doctors found she had 25 separate cuts on her head from a blunt object. Several of those cuts had caused skull fracture, brain hemorrhage, and contusions on her brain. She also suffered 2 stab wounds on her neck. Tragically, at 1 p.m. that day, Carol Thompson succumbed to her wounds and died in the hospital.
So sad.
I know, she's
No.
so young, too.
After fighting so hard, too.
The young mother of 4 was gone, silenced by an unfathomable, vicious attack. Cotton was informed of his wife's fate not long after she died. When he arrived at the hospital to identify Carol's body, he sobbed at the news of her passing. He was a grieving, heartbroken widower who had just lost the mother of his children in a senseless murder. Friends and family rallied around Cotton and the kids. Carol's elderly parents, Otto and Antonia, were devastated at the loss of their only child and stepped in to help care for the grandchildren in the immediate aftermath of this tragedy. The community collectively mourned Carol's death. How could this happen? Who could have done such a thing, and why? These questions hung in the air, demanding answers. St. Paul police launched an intense investigation immediately after Carol's murder. They had a brutal crime scene on their hands and a panicked public demanding the madmen be caught. Detectives went to the house as Carol was on her way to the hospital and found the front door locked. They managed to get inside by finding a side door unlocked that opened to the kitchen. They were greeted with a chaotic scene. Blood in multiple rooms, signs of struggle everywhere. Detectives found the piece of heavy rubber tubing on the floor in the kitchen. They found a drawer in the kitchen that had been pulled out with silverware and knives all over the floor. As they walked through the kitchen, they came to the front door and found a large pool of blood. In the blood, they found 3 unspent live rounds and weird pieces of plastic in it. The gun, a pistol, had broken during the attack, likely from being used as a bludgeon, and fragments of the gun's grip were found on the floor. Investigators pretty early on realized this was likely the assailant's weapon and what had been used to hit Carol. The front door, like I said, was locked when they arrived, but they noticed a safety latch that was broken off. So it's like one of those slider locks like on a hotel room. They had one. The door had been pulled so hard, the lock came off the door frame.
Can you imagine when the guy came down after cleaning up and she's gone?
Oh my gosh.
He's like,
what?
Probably just
where did she go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ran out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not getting paid for this one.
He also could have thought maybe someone else was there and like had moved her or something. I don't know.
Maybe.
Probably realized he messed up. Just took off. I don't know.
Yes. Detectives moved upstairs and found smears of blood in the sink, leading them to believe the attacker had tried to clean up before fleeing. In the master bathroom, they found 6 to 7 inches of water in the bathtub. In the master bedroom, they found a chaotic nightmare. The room looked ransacked and blood was everywhere. The mess, though, seemed like it had no real purpose. They felt like it may have been staged to sell a robbery gone wrong theory, and nothing appeared to be missing.
Had she just gotten out of the shower when he showed up? Is that what you...
No,
Okay.
She had gone upstairs. She was in her bathrobe, and I don't know if she hadn't showered or if she was just doing her hair and makeup
Okay.
and getting dressed, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Detectives noted that the phone line in the master bedroom was disconnected. They found the missing telephone set later. We'll get to that. An odd detail that raised their eyebrows at the time. Could the killer have removed the phone to prevent Carol from calling out? It seemed overly sophisticated for a random intruder. And what about the family dog? Neighbors mentioned the Thompsons had recently and inexplicably gotten rid of their pet. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but investigators quietly filed that detail away as well. Early on, police pursued the obvious leads. Was this a burglary gone wrong? The house showed no signs of forced entry or theft. Carol's purse and valuables were untouched, and in fact, her wedding ring was found by the front door, just under the rug that was there. Was it an assault by a stranger with a random target? Possibly, but why pick an occupied home in daylight? Most of the homes in the neighborhood weren't occupied at that time of day even. Detectives canvassed the area for suspicious persons. One neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar man lurking around that morning, and there were footprints in the snow leading from the Thompson house. A few composite sketches were drawn up from descriptions. Police had a couple pieces of the puzzle, but nothing solid yet.
You would think that the rubber thing that had metal pieces in it would lead them to think he was there to attack somebody and not
Mhm.
like a robbery gone wrong. 'Cause why would you take that to a robbery?
I feel like they're keeping that in their mind, but maybe just ruling other things out
Maybe.
first. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they did find some of the rubber, right? From the thing. Yeah.
They
Yeah,
did
in
find
the
the whole
kitchen- the
thing,
whole
right?
thing. He
Oh,
left
the
it
whole
in the
thing.
Left it
Oh,
there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like when he went in to get the knife, he dropped it, and then I think he forgot about it.
Yeah.
As Carol was gone.
Attacking him.
Yeah.
As Carol left, and then he had to hurry and leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too bad that the son or husband didn't try to go over to her house. I know that they were trying to save her, but maybe they could have caught him
No, that's such a good point.
leaving because there
Yeah.
were 3 of them there.
Or even just stood outside to
Or
see.
just
if
go to
anyone
look
left.
and
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
if they could see who had done this because
Mhm.
I mean she's in her bathrobe. Obviously, she was in her house when it happened.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
kind of too bad that someone didn't go out to see if they could see him.
Yeah. Especially where you've got 2 men there. 'Cause The
Mhm.
doctor came over too.
Yeah.
And, his wife was watching out the window. So it's too bad she didn't really see him running
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. Because who knows how long he was in there before he left. If he was really trying to clean up or ransack the house and things like that, he could have
Mhm.
been in there for a while.
Yeah.
If they had gone over there, they might have found him.
He did hear Carol leaving,
Okay.
but he was still upstairs. And then when he peered down the stairs, the door was open and she was gone. And so he ran out right after.
Okay.
But he had to have pulled the door and locked it and gone out the side door. So maybe the neighbors weren't able to see that from their viewpoint.
Maybe the way that he ran wouldn't have been a way that they could see.
Yeah. But you would think because police were there by 9:07 or something really quick. You would think if he was on foot, they could canvass the area.
Yeah.
He had to ransack that room really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know how long because at 8:30, Carol was there fine and not distressed. And then by 9:07, the police have arrived.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really fast.
And for all of that to happen and ransack the house
Mhm.
to make it look the way that they did
Mm-hmm.
and disappear, it seems like someone
It is
should have been
too
able to
bad
see
They
him.
weren't looking for
An
someone with
attacker.
blood on them
Yeah.
or something.
Watching for some kind of attacker. And I know trying to save her was probably the biggest thing that they were
Mhm.
worrying about.
Right. But detectives went to the house, as soon as the ambulance arrived.
Yeah.
Probably could have had some looking.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought
Interesting.
about that, but that's spot on.
Or if they would have canvassed the area or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
As far as I know, there wasn't a getaway car, but I'm not 100% on that.
Because he could have parked down the street and
Mhm.
jogged to it and took off the other way or something. But I don't know.
And then it's too bad that nobody noticed a strange car on the street or something.
But if it was at 8:30 in the morning and most of the houses are usually empty,
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's true. Well, we know standard procedure in cases like this are first to consider those closest to the victim. From the get-go, investigators kept a subtle eye on Cotton. It's always an uncomfortable thought, but statistically, the spouse is often a suspect in a woman's murder. In this case, Cotton's emotional reaction seemed genuine, and he had an alibi. He was at work. And remember, the neighbor asked Carol who did this, and she would have said Cotton if it had been him, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was at work during the time of the assault. He had called her from work, and he got the call after that something had happened while at work. So he had an alibi. He told investigators that he left around 7:30 that morning. He took his son to school and he went to work. He had called the house at 8:30 to confirm the kids' pickup from school that day. I guess Carol was taking an art class or a pottery class. And so he was picking them up while she had that class that afternoon.
Mm.
He said that Carol sounded normal, nothing was off, and that was the last time he had spoken to her. Certain things about the case just didn't sit right, though. The sheer savagery of the attack was unusual for a random crime in this neighborhood. Carol wasn't sexually assaulted and nothing was stolen. So typical burglary or things like that didn't fit well. Could it have been a targeted hit? If so, who would want Carol dead? She was beloved and had no known enemies. Detectives decided to canvass neighbors, but other than the Nelsons and the Pearsons, they struggled to find someone who could give any additional insight. Most were already out of the house for the day. They spoke with Mrs. Pearson and a handyman who had been working on a nearby house that morning, who said that they thought they had seen Carol crumpled on a different neighbor's doorstep before making her way to the Nelsons, which is so sad.
Yes.
And I don't know if she had tried a closer neighbor first, or maybe she just couldn't make it to the Nelsons without stopping and knew that Ruth would be home.
Yeah, maybe she knew that the other neighbors weren't home who lived
Mhm.
closer. So she was trying to get to Ruth's house.
Right. And Mrs. Pearson had seen that, which is why she called her husband and had him go over.
Hmm.
Detectives were at a loss. They considered the possibility that maybe a former disgruntled client of Cotton could be to blame. They got a list of his previous clients from him, but Cotton was insistent that none of his former clients could be so upset as to commit this kind of violence. They also started to look into Carol's background to see if there was something that stood out. Friends, neighbors, families, they all had such kind things to say about her. They told detectives she was always learning new things, like the class that she was doing that day. They said she was interesting, extroverted, happy. They reported that Carol and Cotton had a great relationship and a great marriage. They were told she was a great party planner. She could put any event together.
I do have to say with that, I feel like you're not going to find anyone that's like, oh, yeah, she was the worst. Like right after.
That's what they always say about
Yeah.
these. Like,
I know. So don't light up a room.
don't
That's
light
all
up
I'm
a room because
saying.
then you're going to be the one that gets murdered.
Yeah.
I know.
You never hear that.
No.
Well, they were the darkest one in the room.
Yeah.
No one liked them anyway.
No one liked them. Yep.
The darkest.
Shadow in the corner.
A shadow in the corner with that specific type of sense of humor.
Yeah. Detectives knew what you just said. They would only get the good stuff. So they pushed and they promised that really any small information could help solve this. Those same friends and neighbors shared a few interesting tidbits. Some shared that while Carol was an extraordinary mother, she may not have been happy to give up her dreams of college and a profession to support Cotton's dream. Others shared that maybe their marriage wasn't as perfect as they had originally stated. Some women told the investigators that while they didn't believe Carol was having a full-blown affair, she did have a male friend they referred to as Big Red. They said he was more attentive and interested in her than what they considered appropriate at the time. No one claimed it was an affair, just that he liked Carol and seemed too into her. They also got the feeling that Cotton didn't like the friendship and it made him frustrated and maybe even angry. Detectives didn't have much, if anything, to go on.
Did they find Big Red?
They did. So that was their next step. They found out Big Red was Kenneth Morin. He was in his early 30s and had met Cotton and Carol a year prior when he sold them those new windows and doors. He liked a lot of the same things Carol did. They would visit museums or art galleries. When detectives went to speak to him, he insisted that he and Carol were just friends and that he hadn't seen her for months, since November. And actually, the reason that he hadn't seen her since November was because they had been in the backyard having a chat that afternoon, and Cotton had come home, freaked out, screamed at him, and told him to never come to his house again. So they hadn't seen each other for 4 or 5 months. He also had an alibi for the day of her murder. He was working, which was confirmed by his boss, and he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Detectives really got the impression that Carol was well-liked, and they couldn't find anyone that could offer an explanation for what happened. Meanwhile, public pressure to solve the case was mounting. The newspapers ran story after story about the mystery intruder and frightened Highland Park residents. Tips and rumors poured in. Police followed up leads of ex-convicts or prowlers in the area. For a few weeks, it looked like the investigation might stall, which only heightened the community's anxiety. So they turned to digging into Cotton a little more. Police found, what do you think they found?
He meant to a hitman.
Close. Multiple life insurance policies taken out on Carol from different insurance companies. They found 2 term life insurance policies, 3 accidental death policies,
Oh my gosh.
and 3 group term policies covering each member of the family. This totaled to more than $1 million, which today...
Laura's just shaking her head. I don't know.
I don't want to look stupid again.
Well, it is over $10.5 million today that he had out
Wow.
on her.
I wasn't going to guess that.
It
That's a lot.
is a lot.
That doesn't look suspicious at all.
Yeah, why so many?
Why
I guess so you can
many?
get the million, but
8.
yeah.
8.
Do you really think if your wife dies, no one's going to question all
Why
the
you
life insurance policies? Yeah.
It's so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Even better, they found out that some of the policies were set to expire next month.
Totally normal.
Mm-hmm. Finding out these key details, detectives obviously wanted to speak with Cotton. Cotton, he wasn't about to do that. He sent his friend, Douglas Young, to the press to give a statement. This statement was pretty wild, like he was trying to get ahead of the situation. Doug laid out all the policies, the purchase prices, the payouts, the terms, every possible detail.
Weird.
Weird. Yes. He also said the reason wasn't debt. He stressed they had no debt, very few bills. Cotton and Carol felt like they could afford the $200 a month in payments, which is $2,100 today,
Oh my gosh.
every month for life insurance.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. He said the policies were for the children in case anything happened to them, and they weren't planning to keep the policies once the kids were adults. So the reasons were plausible. It could kind of make sense. But what investigators wondered was why Cotton hid this from them in their initial conversation. They had asked him, and he had denied it. It wasn't until he somehow found out they were digging into this and finding the policies did he go and put out this statement and address it. And by the way, this statement he put out to the newspaper and didn't send it to police. They just got to read it in the newspaper the next day. So
That's
weird.
Not suspicious at all.
No.
And
As detectives looked into the policies, they seemed to have been taken out by Carol, but they weren't entirely convinced of this. They sent the documents off to the FBI for handwriting analysis, hoping to truly confirm if she was aware of these or not.
I just got like a vision of him calling, like pretending to be Carol, or like dressing up like her to go take these out or something.
We're thinking of the lottery murder case.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Oh. While police waited for results of the handwriting analysis, they decided to look into the pieces of plastic they found at the scene. They had definitely conclusively decided that it did come from a gun. Detectives didn't even know what kind of gun it was, though. They held a televised news conference and showed the pieces while asking for the public's help in identifying where this grip came from, what kind of gun it was, really anything related. Police didn't know if this was going to give them any leads, but they didn't have to wait long. Within a week, a man named Wayne Brandt called. He told them he knew the grip well. He had made it in a shop class years and years ago. He told them it was a 7.65 millimeter Luger pistol. Then he dropped the bombshell just as police were about to get their hopes up. He told them the gun had been stolen from him on February 14th, just weeks before the murder. He said several items were stolen, which he had reported, including a TV, a typewriter, and a diamond ring. He told them, yes, the gun is mine, but I swear I had nothing to do with the murder. The stars aligned when a few days later there was a holdup and a man named Willard Ingram was arrested. This wasn't his first offense. In fact, he had a lengthy criminal history. He told detectives he was willing to give them information on other crimes to help him in the case of his own robbery. Police said they would work with him, not knowing he had key info on Carol's murder. Ingram admitted that he was the one who had robbed Brandt's apartment and stolen the gun. So, admitting to a robbery while you're getting in trouble for a robbery. Check. He said, though, he gave the gun to his friend Norman Mastrian. Mastrian, 40, was a former professional boxer, a prize fighter in his youth, turned small-time gangster in the Twin Cities. He was known around town as a guy who could, quote, get things done in the underworld, though mostly petty stuff like gambling or roughing people up. That was until 1962 when Norman was the prime suspect in a kidnapping and murder of a local bar owner. Not quite so petty anymore.
No, that's quite the leap.
Investigator, from petty,
from petty gambling,
Yep. Investigators tried everything at the time to build a case, but they were not able to, and he was never formally charged. But everyone knew that he was responsible. Detectives got a warrant for the arrest of Norman and went to his home on April 19th. He flat out refused. He wouldn't open the door, and he certainly didn't come out, since that isn't how warrants work. Detectives pretty quickly got permission to use force and arrest Norman. Police went back, kicked in the door, and arrested him without incident. Once they got to the station, he quickly told them he knew nothing about Carol's murder when asked, and promptly asked for a lawyer. While they had been working on arresting Norman, police found a second witness to help cement their case against him. A man named Henry Butler was in custody, waiting for a trial for a robbery he was accused of.
Come on, guys.
There's so many criminals criminaling in this.
Criminaling. I like that word.
Yes.
Criminaling.
Criminals are criminaling.
Yes. He told police that he had seen Norman with the gun used on Carol. However, get this, he says he saw Norman give the gun to another man, Dick Anderson.
This hot potato gun. Come on, guys.
Just bouncing from criminal to criminal. Dick Anderson was a surprise name to investigators. He was a military vet who had been wounded in the line of duty twice. He had recently fallen on hard times and had been committing petty robberies to get by. He was nowhere near the level of criminal that had come up in the case so far, but detectives had to follow the gun. So they got a warrant for his arrest, only he was nowhere to be found. After putting out feelers, a reporter called in a tip saying Anderson had skipped town and he was staying at the Tropic Motor Hotel in Phoenix, Arizona.
No.
Yep. Detectives in St. Paul contacted Phoenix PD, who agreed to go find Anderson. They showed up to the hotel just in time to find Anderson, luggage in hand, about ready to check out. Turns out the reporter who gave the tip to St. Paul PD called and had an interview with Anderson and let him know detectives in St. Paul knew where he was and had a warrant for his arrest.
Oh, reporter. Come on.
Not cool.
No.
Anderson claimed he was only in Phoenix for a vacation, and he had no idea who Norman Mastery was. He said he didn't know anyone named Henry Butler or Willard Ingram and had absolutely no intel on Carol's murder, knew nothing about it. After telling Phoenix PD he would sign extradition papers, he decided that he was not going back to St. Paul and contacted a lawyer in Phoenix. When the Phoenix PD had gone to arrest Anderson, he wasn't alone. He was with a man named Richard Sharp. Sharp was actually a known criminal in Minnesota and had went with Anderson to Phoenix to avoid being arrested for a different robbery that he had been part of. Like, you can't make this up.
There's so many.
So many criminals. Sharp, though, had some serious self-preservation going on and agreed to share everything he knew for leniency in all of his current legal battles.
They're all turning on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Just the one. Well, I guess
Well,
the
they
others
cute.
have
I
said,
gave-
I saw him
I
give
saw
it.
him do this. I gave
Yeah.
this gun to him.
Yep. The detectives were not about to let him off without all of the details. Before long, they had a 23-page statement from him laying out
Wow.
all the details. His role, he said, was to collect the money that would be paid for Carol's murder and give it to the man who committed the murder, his travel buddy, Dick Anderson. Who was paying Dick? Well, Sharp said that it was Norman Mastrian. Investigators were a little stumped. Why on earth would Norman want Carol killed? It made no sense. He had mob ties, but she most certainly had no connection to anything of the sort. While investigators tried to piece together how the two were connected, another criminal with related information was arrested.
For robbery?
I don't know. I want to say robbery, but
Probably.
I didn't write that in my notes. So Sheldon Morris, he was a friend of Norman's. He claimed that he knew where Anderson had disposed of the gun. Turns out he did. He led them to a remote area in the woods, and they were able to find it.
Oh, wow.
Now, detectives know Ingram stole the gun. He gave it to Norman. Norman gave it to Anderson, who then killed Carol. With Anderson finally on his way back to St. Paul, detectives felt like they nearly had it all. They even had the murder weapon. But they still couldn't piece together why Norman would want to kill Carol. It didn't add up. Detectives knew they somehow had to connect Norman to the Thompson family. They went back to the list of previous clients Cotton had given them, and bingo. They had been wrong looking for a disgruntled former client, but not wrong in looking at former clients. Cotton, as it turns out, knew Norman from way back. They'd attended Macalester College together years earlier, though they hadn't been close then. In mid-1962, Cotton had reconnected with Norman when he needed a lawyer for a minor, kidnapping and murder case, and then used Cotton to try to sue the city for false arrest, which is so ballsy. When you did it, everyone knows you did it, and they just couldn't put the case together. The two struck up a friendship, an odd friendship, one might note, between an upstanding attorney and a hoodlum with mob ties. Detectives would soon find out throughout late 1962, Cotton and Norman met frequently, sometimes in unusual out-of-office locations like parking lots or a pancake house. Once Anderson was back in St. Paul, he denied everything. He denied knowing anyone else connected to the case. He denied killing Carol. His whole MO was deny. However, by late June, so it's probably more than a month, 6 weeks, he cracked. He finally broke down and told them everything. This was the bombshell moment, the twist that no one in Carol's family or neighborhood saw coming. The grieving husband was allegedly the mastermind behind the brutal slaying of his wife. Anderson's confession pointed to a conspiracy involving multiple people. Cotton as the one who wanted his wife dead, Norman as the middleman who arranged the hit, and Anderson himself as the hired killer who carried it out. It was almost too outrageous to believe. And yet, the pieces were now falling into place to corroborate this tale.
And this is why people always look into the spouse,
Yep.
especially if it's a woman.
Yep. And especially with 8 separate life insurance policies.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. With Anderson talking, the whole plot came to light. Imagine a group of bumbling criminals conspiring over late-night coffee and phone calls. It's terrifying and somehow darkly comic. Here's how it went down according to court testimony and evidence. In early 1962, Cotton began having an affair with his secretary, Jacqueline, or she went by Jackie. Cotton was 34, Jackie was in her early 20s, and Cotton fell hard for her. The affair carried on for over a year under Carol's nose, but Jackie didn't want to be a mistress forever. She pressured Cotton to divorce Carol and marry her. Cotton stalled, likely because divorcing Carol would be messy and costly for him.
What is with these men and thinking murder is better than a divorce?
Seriously.
Oh, my goodness.
At one point, Jackie gave Cotton an ultimatum: end the marriage or she was gone. Cotton pleaded for more time, reportedly begging Jackie, no, just give me 11 months and then we will have enough money for us to live on.
Mm-hmm.
His words implied a scheme was already percolating in his mind. Later, much later, decades later, Carol's kids would say that they think Carol knew about this affair and others, which is a bummer.
But she can't even have a friend. Come on, Cotton.
That's like the most outrageous part.
Yeah.
Like he's actively cheating on her with multiple people
Mm-hmm.
and then freaks out.
Yeah.
And her kids also said that the day before she was killed, she said to her oldest daughter, something like, what would you think if I went away for a little while? And she was like, no, where are you going?
Mm-hmm.
And they think now she was planning on leaving him without
Oh.
telling him. Yeah. So the 11 months, what did Cotton mean by needing 11 months? This leads us to, of course, motive number one, money. In early 1962, Cotton began quietly shopping for life insurance policies on Carol. And like we mentioned, not just one policy, many policies. A friend in the insurance business had suggested he get a $50,000 policy on his wife. That was normal. That's what they did. Cotton took that advice and ran with it to the extreme. Some were standard life insurance, but a lot were accidental death policies or riders, which only pay out if the death is by accident. One insurance agent told detectives Cotton had told him, while getting all the accidental death policies, that he had a sort of premonition that Carol would die in an accident.
Oh, gosh.
Maybe let's report that.
Right?
Yeah.
And by early 1963, Cotton had then amassed over $1 million in life insurance on Carol's life. And of course, the sole beneficiary to all these policies was, of course, Cotton. This was, to say, at the very least, a gigantic red flag.
Yes.
Yeah. Carol, it turns out, had no idea her life was insured to the hilt. She might have known about the first one, but Cotton kept it all very hush-hush. And of course, life insurance alone doesn't prove intent to kill, but pair it with the mistress, and things are looking pretty ugly. Cotton had money and love as motivating factors. Really, he stood to gain a fortune if Carol died, and he could satisfy Jackie's demand that he be free of marriage without a costly divorce or scandal. It was a cruel calculation. To have the life he wanted, Carol had to go. And Cotton wasn't about to get his own hands dirty. Oh no. He decided to outsource the murder.
They were paying around $200 per policy a month, right?
They were paying $200 total.
Oh, $200 total. And he's thinking that's going to be more than just a divorce, I guess.
I know, right?
Like
Because,
alimony and child support and stuff.
Yeah, I guess.
But
he's not planning on paying alimony, he's not planning on paying the premiums for very long.
That's true, because she was going to
because they were
accidentally
expiring.
die.
A couple of them were, but also, even with the 20-year ones, he's only going to pay it for a year
Yeah, that's true.
as opposed to alimony and child support, which would be
Longer.
much longer. Yeah.
Till the kids turned 18. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you said the youngest was 6.
Right.
So
You've got
Yeah,
a while.
at least 12 years there.
Okay.
Mhm. And alimony, who knows how long.
Yeah.
So he decides to outsource the murder. And that's where Norman enters, the shady friend. Sometime in late 1962, maybe very early 1963, Cotton approached Norman with a proposition. He asked Norm to help arrange Carol's death with a chunk of that insurance payout as a reward. We don't have Cotton and Norm's exact conversation, if only there had been a wiretap at the Pancake House. But clearly, Norm agreed to be the middleman. He then set out to find someone willing to do the deed. Over February 1963, Norman quietly floated the murder proposition to a few low-level underworld contacts. One witness later testified that Norman asked a guy named Richard Sharp if he'd kill a woman for $2,000. So this guy's getting $1 million and he's going to pay $2,000. But also $2,000 then is over $20,000 now. So
It's a decent amount. Yeah.
Well, and it's probably Norman, was he getting some money too? So
yeah,
he's
for arranging all of it.
yeah.
I believe that they found out within hours of Carol's murder. He had like a courier from the law office deliver $2,500 to Norman. And I'm sure some of that goes to the back end of paying Anderson for killing Carol.
Mhm.
And probably some of it was for Norman too.
Yeah.
Norman had described the woman in vague terms to Richard Sharp. He said she was a church-going woman with 4 children and that she was heavily insured. He even outlined the Desire method, hitting her with a rubber hose and then drowning her in the bathtub. The reward, Norman promised, would be $2,000. But if you could make it look like an accident, the fee would go up to $3,000. And, why more for the accident? Because Cotton would collect more money from those accidental death insurance clauses, and he would get paid more.
How would hitting her with a rubber hose and drowning her in a bathtub be anything close to accidental?
I think they were planning to make it look like she slipped, hit her head, and, the rubber hose.
So it wouldn't leave any marks behind.
Right.
Yeah.
Or at least they could maybe write it off as hitting it on, like a towel holder or something in the bathtub and then falling in and drowning. So it was just an accident.
Well, and if she was in her bathrobe, they could make it look like she was filling up the bathtub to get in and
had slipped
something happened.
Right.
Okay.
Sharp turned down the job. Apparently, even among criminals, killing a housewife in cold blood for a couple grand was a hard sell. But Sharp referred Norman to someone who might be desperate enough, Dick Anderson, a sometimes friend of theirs. On March 3rd, 1963, Norman met Anderson and offered him the contract to kill Carol. So just 3 days, which is crazy. Anderson, who is 25 years old, was indeed in need of cash and evidently had fewer scruples. He said he'd think about it. The very next day, March 4th, Anderson agreed to do it, but he demanded $1,000 upfront. Norman managed to scrape together $1,000, likely from Cotton, who may have passed him cash in a parking lot meetup, and paid Anderson in advance. The plan was explicitly to make Carol's death look like an accident in the tub. So like we said, the hose to knock her out and then a drowning. And then Cotton could cash in on all the accidental riders on the policies. And it was a devious plan, but as we've seen, reality played out quite differently. Dick Anderson went to the Thompson home on the morning of March 6th to carry out the murder. Anderson was instructed to sneak into the house through a side door that Cotton would leave open before anyone woke up. He was supposed to wait in the basement for his cue. His cue would be a phone call to the house from Cotton when he got to work that day, ensuring the house would be empty except for Carol, and Cotton would have his ironclad alibi.
Wow.
Yep. Before leaving the house, Cotton filled the tub with the 6 to 7 inches of water, and Anderson was supposed to knock Carol out with the rubber hose and make it look like she slipped and fell. Anderson attempted to follow the script, hose, drown, etc., but Carol's unexpected resistance threw the plan off. This next detail will break your heart. Carol had thought she was being robbed. As she managed to get away from him and make it to the front door, she couldn't get the slide lock latch undone quick enough, and Anderson caught up with her. And it turns out, years later, her son would say that on the morning of his mom's murder, his dad asked him to lock the sliding latch and made sure that it got done before they left for school.
Oh,
wow.
Awful.
It's awful. How can you do that to your kids?
Right?
Like, do you really think it's better to kill their mom?
I
take her from
cannot-
them rather than just
cannot
deal with a
even-
divorce?
Right. Just get divorced.
Wow.
mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even have those mental gymnastics to think that
Mm.
that would be better in the long
No.
run.
4 young kids where she's like
Yeah.
their world.
Yes.
Mhm.
It was so
So
tragic.
Mhm. I guess they really never locked that. The son thought it was odd and that his dad checked to make sure that it had been locked. And, Carol might have been able to get out if it weren't for that.
Mm-hmm.
So did she hear him and she tried to run out the front door and
No,
then
That was
but
after the drowning.
yeah.
Oh.
So he had tried to drown her and hit her with the hose, but that was before he hit her with the butt of the gun
Okay.
or stabbed her.
Okay.
So if she could have gotten out the door, the gun misfired 3 times,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then she probably could have made it to another house or screamed or something, and he would have
Awful.
probably had to run away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Ugh. Yeah. So when Carol couldn't get that lock undone and Anderson was right there behind her, she took off her wedding ring to give to him, hoping that he would just leave. And that's when he pulled the trigger of the gun, which misfired. And that's why they found her ring under the rug when detectives came back in.
Mhm.
Kind of crazy he didn't take it.
Yeah.
He needs money. He's
Probably
desperate.
just panicked and
Yeah.
forgot about it, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
you would think you'd take it first and then
Pocket
light
it.
a fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh.
So Anderson said when the gun misfired, it panicked him because he was really close to her getting away, which is why he started hitting her with the gun. Then he went into the kitchen, pulled out that drawer, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her. He thinks that Carol pretended to be dead, and when he was satisfied, he went back upstairs to stage the robbery and clean himself up. When he was up there, he heard a noise and went back to check, only to see the front door open and Carol gone. Anderson freaked out and fled the scene. On June 21st, which is today.
Oh.
Not weird.
That is weird. What a coincidence.
And the other day was Dad's birthday.
Yeah, the April.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
On June 21st, 1963, after building a solid case from all of these other criminals and all of the evidence, police formally arrested T. Eugene Thompson and charged him with first-degree murder in his wife's murder. A famous newspaper photo shows Cotton being taken into custody. He's well-dressed in a suit, flanked on both sides by detectives, looking less like a dangerous killer and more like a businessman caught embezzling. St. Paul collectively gasped at the news. Neighbors, who had initially felt sorry for Cotton, now felt betrayed and sickened. Carol's parents were stunned that their son-in-law, whom they had embraced as family, could be accused of orchestrating such evil. The case that had begun as a hunt for a random madman had transformed into a tale of money, sex, and cold-blooded murder. The media had an absolute field day. This story had everything: a respectable lawyer leading a secret double life, a pretty young mistress, a big insurance fortune, underworld hitman, and a gruesome crime in suburbia. It was as if a soap opera script had come to life on the front pages.
Did her kids end up getting that insurance money then? Were they listed as beneficiaries?
Because it said on a lot of them he was the sole beneficiary.
Ugh.
So I would like to hope that they got something, but I don't know how that played out back then.
That doesn't pay out to your murderer, does it?
No, no, it does not.
No.
So, but I wondered if the kids were on there.
As like if they both died or something.
Yeah.
I would think so, but
Yeah, I don't know if that counts, though, if he is arrested and still alive.
yeah, that's true.
I don't know.
We'll have to look into that. Good question. By the fall of 1963, Carol's case was headed towards trial. Cotton's trial for first-degree murder began on October 27th and lasted 6 weeks. It was one of the most high-profile trials Minnesota had ever seen. The courtroom in St. Paul was packed every day with journalists and spectators, all eager to see real-life drama play out. Remember, this was pre-O.J. Simpson, pre-Netflix. A trial like this was must-see, almost entertainment. In fact, it was so big, That news of the trial made national headlines. And fun fact, on November 22nd, 1963, as Thompson's trial was underway, the UPI Newswire story about it was literally interrupted by bulletins that President John F. Kennedy had been shot. Talk about a news day overshadowing your crime story. The prosecution, led by Ramsey County Attorney William Randall, presented a damning case against Cotton. They laid out the motive, his financial desperation, his desire to be with his mistress, Jackie. They highlighted the over $1 million, so $1.1 million in life insurance on Carol, pointing out how absurdly excessive it was. They introduced evidence of the other woman who Cotton was allegedly determined to marry, even though Jackie herself did not testify. She was actually remarried by the time of the trial. So it was only like 6-7 months later.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. He killed his wife and ruined his life for someone who is now married to somebody else. Interesting.
And the 10.5 million. Yeah.
Yeah.
One newspaper noted that prosecutors delicately referred to Jackie as a female companion who was not his wife. So we're Minnesota nice, even when discussing adultery. They also showed the jury the pattern of premeditation, how Cotton removed the dog. They found the telephone in his car.
Oh, gosh.
Had established alibis. They had paper trail for him paying Norman. Piece by piece, Randall connected the dots of the conspiracy. The star witness for the prosecution was, without a doubt, Dick Anderson, the hitman who had wielded the hose, the gun, and the knife. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty or an even harsher penalty than life in prison, because Minnesota didn't have the death penalty at the time, but he wanted to avoid life without possibility of parole. Anderson took the stand and spilled everything in vivid detail. Courtroom observers were riveted and horrified as Anderson calmly described the planning and the step-by-step brutality of the attack on Carol. He recounted how Carol had fought back and nothing went according to plan. At one point, Anderson recalled Carol's desperate will to live, and that was the quote we read above, where I never saw anyone who wanted to live so hard in all my life. Such testimony made Carol a sympathetic figure to the jury, a devoted mother, heroically fighting for her life, and painted Cotton as monstrously culpable for setting these events in motion. Anderson's testimony was so dramatic and shocking that the newspapers called it detailed and dramatic and shocking. One headline summarized it as Anderson relates shocking story of Carol's murder. Victim shouted, God help me, court told. You can imagine the jury hanging on every word of this confessed killer describing Carol's final moments. It was the emotional core of the trial. Cotton's defense team, led by prominent Twin Cities criminal lawyer named Chaim Siegel, faced an uphill battle. How do you defend a man against such overwhelming evidence? Their strategy basically was to claim that all these witnesses were liars and that Cotton was being framed by criminals.
Always the defense. Everyone else is lying.
Yep. The defense argued that Cotton was a loving husband and father, and it was ludicrous to think that he would plot to kill Carol.
Besides, giving away the dog and hiding the phone in your very own car.
And paying the criminals.
Yes.
And forging her name on life insurance documents.
Well, and it probably worked out better for them that Jackie was remarried. They could deny that. No, he didn't want to be with her. Look, she's married to someone else.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. The defense pointed fingers at accomplices, suggesting maybe they concocted this story to save themselves. He tried to poke holes in Anderson's credibility. After all, Anderson was an admitted murderer and a, quote, small-time hoodlum. Was his word even reliable? The defense also highlighted that there was no direct evidence of Cotton ordering the hit, like no signed contract or recorded conversation, just testimony from criminals. A lot of criminals. It was a classic reasonable doubt approach, just like you said.
Yeah.
Perhaps unwisely, Cotton insisted on testifying in his own defense. Against his lawyer's advice, Cotton took the stand, believing he could charm the jury as he had charmed so many people in his life. This turned out to be a massive mistake. Under cross-examination, Cotton couldn't adequately explain the mountain of circumstantial evidence. The insurance, the cash payment, the meetings with Norman. He tried to claim the insurance was for estate planning and that his relationship with Jackie was over long before. And he even claimed that Carol had known about his affair and forgiven him, implying he had no reason to kill her. This was uncorroborated and seemed self-serving. Observers noted that Cotton's time on the stand did more harm than good to his case.
Great.
His attempt to play the innocent family man rang hollow in the face of so many facts. The prosecutor, Randall, likely had a field day making Cotton squirm on the stand. On the day the verdict was read, reporters described Cotton sitting pale but composed, eyes straight ahead as he awaited his fate. One journalist wrote that as the guilty verdict was read, Cotton dropped his eyes, sighed, and let his head sag to one side, then looked up and stared blankly at the jurors. It was one of the few moments where his mask slipped, revealing the anxiety he felt. The jury only took 12 hours to deliberate and unanimously found him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, which is mandatory for first-degree murder, the very next day. Cotton was 35 years old at the time. Practically the rest of his life, in theory, be spent behind bars. The verdict made headlines not just in Minnesota, but across the nation. The notion of a wealthy attorney plotting his wife's murder in Heartland America was sensational news. In the following months, the other co-conspirators also met justice. Norman was tried separately to avoid co-defendant complications in 1964. Despite his denials, he was convicted of first-degree murder as well, and aiding and abetting, and was given a life sentence. Dick Anderson, who had confessed and testified, pleaded guilty to murder and also received a life sentence. In Minnesota at that time, life sentence actually meant you'd be eligible for parole after a couple of decades, on average 17 to 20 years, depending on behavior. So by mid-1964, all three men responsible for Carol's death were behind bars for life. Well, were behind bars.
Yeah.
The legal chapter of the saga closed, but the personal aftermath was just beginning for those left. With their mother murdered and their father imprisoned as her killer, the four Thompson children faced unimaginable aftermath. In the wake of Cotton's conviction, Carol's elderly parents were granted full custody of the kids. The children remained in St. Paul, living with their grandparents, and a series of housekeepers were hired to help raise them. Carol had been a full-time mom, and now that role fell to grieving grandparents. It was a challenging situation. The kids had lost one parent to violence and lost the other to prison. The community offered support and sympathy, but the stigma was inescapable. These kids were often recognized, sometimes uncomfortably, as the offspring of one of Minnesota's most infamous murder cases. Talk about a heavy legacy for a child to bear. Amazingly, the Thompson children persevered. They continued attending their same schools in Highland Park, trying to maintain routine in the shadow of tragedy. Over time, they each went off to college. They started careers and built lives of their own. And in fact, the eldest, Jeff, grew up to become a lawyer and eventually a Minnesota district court judge. Perhaps inspired in part by seeing firsthand how the justice system dealt with his family's own ordeal. Jeff has spoken sparingly about the case in adulthood, but in a rare interview marking 50 years since the murder, he reflected, "It's like losing an arm. You never forget it, but you have to adapt and adjust and move on." Despite everything, the Thompson children did that. They managed to adapt, adjust, and carry Carol's memory with them. As for Cotton, the man who engineered this tragedy, he spent not even 2 decades in the Minnesota state prison system.
Of course.
By most accounts, he was a model prisoner, Perhaps unsurprising for a man who always carefully managed his image. After about 19 years, Cotton was paroled in 1983. This early release was standard at the time. Like I said, life sentences with good behavior were usually 17 to 20 years. Many people in Minnesota were outraged that Cotton got to walk free while Carol was gone. Conditions were placed on him. He was barred from ever practicing law again. The Minnesota Supreme Court had disbarred him, of course, and he remained on supervised parole. Cotton, when he got out, was in his mid-50s. He returned to the Twin Cities area upon release and, astonishingly, managed to slip back into a low-profile life. He even remarried a few years later.
Ugh.
Yep. Some woman actually married him, perhaps believing in his professed innocence or hoping he had reformed. And by all accounts, Cotton had continued to proclaim his innocence to anyone who asked the rest of his life. He never admitted guilt or apologized for Carol's murder. In an almost cinematic epilogue after Cotton's release, his own children held a kind of kitchen court. They gathered around the kitchen table and essentially put their father on trial, with now lawyer Jeff presenting the evidence against him to Cotton's face. According to Jeff, when pressed for any explanation or proof of innocence, Cotton could produce nothing. Just a lab report about blood types, which proved nothing substantial. The children concluded what the jury had. Their father was guilty. They adapted and moved on. Contact with Cotton was strained. I can't imagine having a normal relationship with the man who murdered your mother,
No.
even if it's your dad.
No. Especially when it happened when they were so long and they all had to grow up for all that time without either of them. No
Yep.
thanks.
Cotton lived out his later years quietly in the 2000s. True crime author William Swanson attempted to interview him for a book, but Cotton refused to talk. Swanson remarked that Cotton would happily reminisce about anything except Carol's murder. That topic he would avoid entirely. In August 2015, at the age of 88, Cotton died in his sleep on his birthday. I hope he was alone.
Mm-hmm.
His family's obituary for him described Cotton as a multifaceted person and included the quote, "Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future." I don't know. Carol's family, one imagines, had a more sober view of his legacy.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah. Norman, the middleman, served about 17 years before he was paroled in 1980. He moved to Arizona.
Oh.
Yep. He reportedly died in 2007 at age 82. Dick Anderson, the hitman, did about 15 years. He was paroled in the late 70s. So isn't that wild? The guy who actually did the murder served the least amount of time.
Yep.
Because he made that deal and turned on everybody else.
Yep. In the realm of pop culture, as mentioned earlier, the bizarre, clumsy nature of the murder plot, the malfunctioning gun, the drawn-out violence, the hired killers with Minnesota nice accents, perhaps, is said to inspired elements of the film Fargo. The Coen brothers have never confirmed it outright, but the parallels are hard to ignore. A husband in Minnesota arranging his wife's murder via incompetent hitman for financial gain. Sounds familiar. I mentioned it a couple times, but William Swanson's 2006 book, Dial M, The Murder of Carol Thompson, is widely considered the definitive account of the case. Definitely read it if you want to learn more about this story. Beyond all the sensational aspects, at its heart, this is the story of a woman who loved and trusted the wrong person. Carol, by all accounts, did nothing to deserve her fate. She was kind, beloved mother, friend, who had the misfortune of being married to a man with neither scruples nor conscience when it came to pursuing what he wanted. Carol's legacy lives on through her children and now her grandchildren, and through the cautionary tale her case has become. It's a story that does indeed mix true crime and some dark satire or comedy, something. A suburban murder plot with more twists than a pretzel. It's also a stark lesson that sometimes our worst enemies lurk where we expect them least. At home, smiling across the dinner table.
Mm.
Oh,
That is the case of Carol Thompson.
Mm.
What do you guys think?
very interesting.
It was.
I've been waiting for this one.
I've had it in
been
our
on the list,
research.
yeah.
for
I've
a
had it
long
on our
time.
list and
Yeah.
I've seen it, but I didn't know
Yeah.
anything about it. I just saw the name. So I was excited when you said that's the one we were doing today.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've been very intrigued.
I think it's been on there for over 6 months.
Since we started. It was
Yeah,
like one of the
yeah.
first ones you put on there.
I know.
And I kept thinking, when are we going to do the case?
We did it. We did
It's
it.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's,
I think it was like you said, very twisty and
mhm.
criminally.
Criminals criminaling.
Yeah.
The thing about this one being in the 60s is it's interesting to see the detective work at the time and how they still were able to do handwriting analysis. They,
Yeah.
Mhm.
had some kind of blood collection and searching for fingerprints.
Yeah.
And so interesting what came out of it was showing, how they were able to solve it.
Mhm.
Essentially was showing the plastic from the gun on TV,
Mhm.
someone seeing it and calling in
Yep, absolutely. And they didn't
That
know if
led to
anyone would see it.
all the criminals.
Yeah, right.
The gun hot potato.
Yes,
Yeah.
the gun hot potato. Wild. Well, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to see the resources we used in this case, you can check out our blog. It's linked from our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributor section. If you have any comments, we would love if you would join us on social media. You can search for @Crime Clueless. It's the same on all of
Everywhere.
our socials. Yep.
Find us everywhere.
Yep. YouTube, Instagram, everywhere. Or you can send us an email, crimeclueless@gmail.com. We would love if you enjoyed this episode, if you would share it. You can find Crime Clueless on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, YouTube, any major streaming platform, we're on there. And as always, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murders.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.